The man who was aware of death. There was once a dervish who embarked upon a sea journey. As the other passengers in the ship came aboard one by one, they saw him and, as is the custom, asked him for a piece of advice. All the dervish would do was to say the same thing to each one of them. He seemed merely to be repeating one of those formulae which each dervish makes the object of his attention from time to time. The formula was, try to be aware of death until you know what death is. Few of the travellers felt particularly attracted to this admonition. Presently a terrible storm blew up. The crew and the passengers alike fell upon their knees, imploring God to save the ship. They alternately screamed in terror, gave themselves up for lost, hoped wildly for succour. All this time the dervish sat quietly, reflective, reacting not at all to the movement and the scenes which surrounded him. Eventually the buffeting stopped, the sea and sky were calm, and the passengers became aware how serene the dervish had been throughout the episode. One of them asked him, "Did you not realize that during this frightful tempest there was nothing more solid than a plank between us all and death?" "Oh yes, indeed," answered the dervish. "I knew that at sea it is always thus. I also realized, however, that I had often reflected when I was on land that, in the normal course of events, there is even less between us and death." This story is by Bayazid of Bistam, a place to the south of the Caspian Sea. He was one of the greatest of the ancient Sufis and died in the latter part of the 9th century. His grandfather was a Zoroastrian, and he received his esoteric training in India. Because his master, Abu Ali of Sind, did not know the external rituals of Islam perfectly, some scholars have assumed that Abu Ali was a Hindu, and that Bayazid was in fact studying Indian mystical methods. No responsible authority, however, accords with this view among the Sufis. The followers of Bayazid include the Bistamiya order. The man who was easily angered. A man who was very easily angered realized after many years that all his life he had been in difficulties because of this tendency. One day he heard of a dervish deep of knowledge, whom he went to see, asking for advice. The dervish said, "Go to such and such a crossroads. There you will find a withered tree. Stand under it and offer water to every traveller who passes that place." The man did as he was told. Many days passed, and he became well known as one who was following a certain discipline of charity and self-control, under the instructions of a man of real knowledge. One day, a man in a hurry turned his head away when he was offered the water, and went on walking along the road. The man who was easily angered called out to him several times, "Come, return my salutation. Have some of this water, which I provide for all travellers." But there was no reply. Overcome by this behaviour, the first man forgot his discipline completely. He reached for his gun, which was hooked in the withered tree, took aim at the heedless traveller, and fired. The man fell dead. At the very moment that the bullet entered his body, the withered tree, as if by a miracle, burst joyfully into blossom. The man who had been killed was a murderer, on his way to commit the worst crime of a long career. There are, you see, two kinds of advisers. The first kind is the one who tells what should be done according to certain fixed principles, repeated mechanically. The other kind is the man of knowledge. Those who meet the man of knowledge will ask him for moralistic advice, and will treat him as a moralist. But what he serves is truth, not pious hopes. The dervish master who figures in this tale is said to have been Najmudin Kubra, one of the greatest of Sufi saints. He founded the Kubravi, or Greater Brethren, which greatly resembled the order later established by St. Francis. Like the saint of Assisi, Najmudin was reputed to have an uncanny power over animals. Najmudin was one of the 600,000 people who died when Khwarizm in Central Asia was destroyed in 1221. It is stated that the great Mongol Genghis Khan, aware of his reputation, offered to spare him if he gave himself up. But he went out with the defenders of the city and was later identified among the dead. Having foreseen the catastrophe, Najmudin had sent all his disciples away to safety some time before the appearance of the Mongol hordes. The Dog and the Donkey. A man who had found out how to understand the significance of the sounds made by animals was walking along a village street one day. He saw a donkey which had just brayed, and beside him was a dog yapping away for all he was worth. As he grew near, the meaning of this exchange came to him. "All this talk of grass and pastures, when I'm waiting for you to say something about rabbits and bones. It bores me," said the dog. The man could not restrain himself. "There is, however, a central fact, the use of hay, which is like the function of meat," he objected. The two animals turned upon him in an instant. The dog barked fiercely to drown his words, and the donkey knocked him senseless with a well-aimed kick of his hind legs. Then they went back to their argument. This story, which resembles one of Rumi's, is a fable from the famed collection of Majnun Kalanda, who wandered for 40 years in the 13th century, reciting teaching stories in marketplaces. Some said that he was completely mad, which is what his name means. Others that he was one of the changed ones, who have developed a sense of the relationship between things which the ordinary person thinks to be separate. Carrying shoes. Two pious and worthy men went into a mosque together. The first one took off his shoes and placed them neatly, side by side, outside the door. The second man removed his shoes, placed them sole to sole, and took them into the mosque with him. There was an argument among a group of other pious and worthy folk who were sitting at the door as to which of these men was the better. If one went barefoot into a mosque, was it not better to leave the very shoes outside? Asked one. But should we not consider, said another, that the man who took his shoes into the mosque carried them to remind himself by their very presence that he was in a state of proper humility? When the two men came out after their prayers, they were questioned separately, as it happened, by different parties from the onlookers. The first man said, "I left my shoes outside for the usual reason. The reason is that if anyone wants to steal them, he will have an opportunity of resisting that temptation, and thus acquiring merit for himself." The listeners were most impressed by the high-mindedness of a man whose possessions were of so little account to him that he willingly entrusted them to whatever might be their fate. The second man, at the same time, was saying, "I took my shoes into the mosque because, had I left them outside, they might have constituted a temptation to steal them. Whoever had yielded to this temptation would have made me his accomplice in sin." The hearers were most impressed by this pious sentiment, and admired the thoughtfulness of the sage. But yet another man, a man of wisdom, who was present, cried out, "While you two men and your followers have been indulging in your admirable sentiment, training each other with the play of hypothetical instances, certain real things have been happening." "What were these things?" asked the crowd. Nobody was tempted by the shoes. Nobody was not tempted by the shoes. The theoretical sinner did not pass by. Instead, another man altogether who had no shoes at all to carry with him or to leave outside entered the mosque. Nobody noticed his conduct. He was not conscious of the effect which he might be having on people who saw him or did not see him. But because of his real sincerity, his prayers in the mosque today helped in the most direct way possible, all the potential thieves who might or might not steal shoes or reform themselves by being exposed to temptation. Do you still not see that the mere practice of self-conscious conduct, however excellent in its own realm, is a pale thing indeed when measured against the knowledge that there are real men of wisdom? This tale from the teachings of the Khilwati, or the Recluse order, founded by Omar Khilwati, who died in 1397, is often quoted. The argument, a common one among dervishes, insists that those who have developed certain inner qualities have a far greater effect upon society than those who try to act on moral principles alone. The former are called the real men of action, and the latter those who do not know but play at knowing. The Man Who Walked on Water. A conventionally minded dervish from an austerely pious school was walking one day along a riverbank. He was absorbed in concentration upon moralistic and scholastic problems, for this was the form which Sufi teaching had taken in the community to which he belonged. He equated emotional religion with the search for ultimate truth. Suddenly his thoughts were interrupted by a loud shout. Someone was repeating the dervish call. "There is no point in that," he said to himself, "because the man is mispronouncing the syllables. Instead of intoning Yahoo, he is saying Ooh Yahoo." Then he realized that he had a duty as a more careful student to correct this unfortunate person, who might have had no opportunity of being rightly guided, and was therefore probably only doing his best to attune himself with the idea behind the sounds. So he hired a boat and made his way to the island in midstream from which the sound appeared to come. Sitting in a reed hut, he found a man, dressed in a dervish robe, moving in time to his own repetition of the initiatory phrase. "My friend," said the first dervish, "you are mispronouncing the phrase. It is incumbent upon me to tell you this, because there is merit for him who gives and him who takes advice. This is the way in which you speak it." And he told him. "Thank you," said the other dervish humbly. The first dervish entered his boat again, full of satisfaction at having done a good deed. After all, it was said that a man who could repeat the sacred formula correctly could even walk upon the waves, something that he had never seen but always hoped, for some reason, to be able to achieve. Now he could hear nothing from the reed hut, but he was sure that his lesson had been well taken. Then he heard a faltering "Ooh ya" as the second dervish started to repeat the phrase in his old way. While the first dervish was thinking about this, reflecting upon the perversity of humanity and its persistence in error, he suddenly saw a strange sight. From the island, the other dervish was coming towards him, walking on the surface of the water. Amazed, he stopped rowing. The second dervish walked up to him and said, "Brother, I am sorry to trouble you, but I have to come out to ask you again the standard method of making the repetition you were telling me, because I find it difficult to remember it." In English, we can reproduce only one of the ranges of significance of this tale, because the Arabic versions generally make use of words of similar sound with different meanings, homonyms, to signpost the claim that this is an artifact designed to draw the consciousness deeper, as well as something with a superficial moral. In addition to figuring in the popular current literature in the East, the story is found in Dervish teaching manuscripts, some of very great age. This version is from the Asasin, or essential, original order, of the Near and Middle East. The Ant and the Dragonfly. An ant with a settled program in its mind was looking at some nectar when a dragonfly swooped to taste from the flower's cup. It flitted away and came and swooped again. This time the ant said, "You live without labour, and you have no plan. As you have no real nor comparative purpose, what is the dominant feature of your life, and where will it end?" Said the dragonfly, "I am happy, and I seek pleasure. This is existence and objective enough. My aim is to have no aim. You may plan as you will, you cannot convince me that there is anything better. You to your plan, me to mine." The ant thought, "That which is visible to me is invisible to him. He does not know what happens to ants. I know what happens to dragonflies. Him to his plan, I to mine." And the ant went his way, for he had admonished as far as was possible in the circumstances. Some time later their paths crossed again. The ant had found a butcher's shop, and he was standing under the chopping block with discretion, awaiting what would come to him. The dragonfly, seeing the red meat from above, came gliding down and settled on it. At that moment the butcher's cleaver descended and cut the dragonfly in two. One half of the body rolled onto the floor at the feet of the ant. Taking up the corpse and starting to drag it towards his nest, the ant recited to himself, "His plan is finished, and mine continues. He to his plan is ended. Me to mine begins a cycle. Pride seemed important. It was a transitory thing. A life of eating to end with being eaten by something else. When I suggested this, all he could think was that I might be a killjoy." Almost the same tale is found in Attar's Divine Book, although the application is slightly different from this version, which was related by a Bokharan dervish near the tomb of El-Shah, Bahuddin Naqshband, 60 years ago. It is from a Sufi notebook kept in the great mosque of Jalalabad. The story of tea. In ancient times, tea was not known outside China. Rumours of its existence had reached the wise and the unwise of other countries, and each tried to find out what it was in accordance with what he wanted, or what he thought it should be. The king of India, or Here, sent an embassy to China, and they were given tea by the Chinese emperor. But since they saw that the peasants drank it too, they concluded that it was not fit for their royal master, and furthermore that the Chinese emperor was trying to deceive them, passing off some other substance for the celestial drink. The greatest philosopher of Anja, or there, collected all the information he could about tea, and concluded that it must be a substance which existed but rarely, and was of another order than anything then known. For was it not referred to as being a herb, a water, green, black, sometimes bitter, sometimes sweet? In the countries of Koshish and Bebinem, for centuries the people tested all the herbs they could find. Many were poisoned, all were disappointed. For nobody had brought the tea plant to their lands, and thus they could not find it. They also drank all the liquids which they could find, but to no avail. In the territory of Mazhab, or sectarianism, a small bag of tea was carried in procession before the people as they went on their religious observances. Nobody thought of tasting it. Indeed, nobody knew how. All were convinced that the tea itself had a magical quality. A wise man said, "Pour upon it boiling water, ye ignorant ones." They hanged him and nailed him up, because to do this, according to their belief, would mean the destruction of their tea. This showed that he was an enemy of their religion. Before he died, he had told his secret to a few, and they managed to obtain some tea and drink it secretly. When anyone said, "What are you doing?" they answered, "It is but medicine which we take for a certain disease." And so it was throughout the world. tea had actually been seen growing by some who did not recognize it. It had been given to others to drink, but they thought it the beverage of the common people. It had been in the possession of others, and they worshipped it. Outside China, only a few people actually drink it, and those covertly. Then came a man of knowledge, who said to the merchants of tea and the drinkers of tea and to others, "He who tastes knows. He who tastes not knows not. Instead of talking about the celestial beverage, say nothing, but offer it at your banquets. Those who like it will ask for more. Those who do not will show that they are not fitted to be tea drinkers. Close the shop of argument and mystery. Open the tea-house of experience." The tea was brought from one stage to another along the Silk Road, and whenever a merchant carrying jade or gems or silk would pause to rest, he would make tea, and offer it to such people as were near him, whether they were aware of the repute of tea or not. This was the beginning of the chaikhanas, the tea-houses which were established all the way from Peking to Bokhara and Samarkand, and those who tasted knew. At first, mark well, it was only the great and the pretended men of wisdom who sought the celestial drink, and who also exclaimed, "But this is only dried leaves," or, "Why do you boil water, stranger, when all I want is the celestial drink?" Or yet again, "How do I know what this is? Prove it to me. Besides, the colour of the liquid is not golden, but ochre." When the truth was known, and when the tea was brought for all who would taste, the roles were reversed, and the only people who said things like the great and intelligent had said were the absolute fools. And such is the case to this day. Drinks of all kinds have been used by almost all peoples as allegories connected with the search for higher knowledge. Coffee, the most recent of social drinks, was discovered by the Dervish Sheikh Abu al-Hasan Shadhili at Mocha in Arabia. Although the Sufis and others often clearly state that magical drinks, wine, the water of life, are an analogy of a certain experience, literalist students tend to believe that the origin of these myths dates from the discovery of some hallucinogenic or inebriative quality in potations. According to the Dervishes, such an idea is a reflection of the investigator's incapacity to understand that they are speaking in parallels. This tale is from the teachings of the Master Hamadani, died 1140, teacher of the great Yasavi of Turkestan.